Hello everyone, I'm Cindy Winget, the author of some Gothic horror mashups, and welcome to my channel. So if you tuned in last week, I did a video about horror books that you may not have heard about because they haven't been really talked about a lot online. And I want to do the same thing, but this time for thriller books. And I'll go ahead and link the horror one if you missed it and you are interested in looking at it. But yeah, so these are all thriller books that I feel don't get a lot of attention online. I don't see a lot of book reviews for them. So you may not have heard of them. So I just wanted to put them on your radar in case you wanted to add them to your TBRs. So let's go ahead and get started. But like last time, we're going to turn this into a game. And if you haven't heard of this book, then give yourself a point. And by the end, let me know in the comment section how many points you got so that I know if I did my job in finding books that you have not heard of before. So the first three I'm going to talk about is a little bit of a cheat because they're not technically thrillers. They're more like detective or police procedural type books, but I'm going to include them anyways. Starting with Now You See Me. And this is part of a series, but they can be read as a standalone. And this one drew my attention specifically because it has to do with Jack the Ripper, and I love Jack the Ripper. So this is still modern times, so it's 120 years after the Jack the Ripper murders. But now in modern times, on the anniversary of those murders, somebody is killing people in the same manner that he did. And so it's up to our intrepid detective to figure out who done it. And then we have The Whispering Room by Amanda Stevens. And this is about a detective who starts this murder case that hits a little bit close to home because it's about this woman who murdered all of her male children because she felt that they had an evil gene. And she didn't touch her female daughters, and so they were able to grow up and become adults. But our detective, she is a new mother, and so reading about this case is kind of hard for her because she has a little boy at home. But these two girls who the mother spared, who are now adults, have started to carry on their mother's work and have begun murdering men. And so she's trying to figure out where they are and try to stop them. And then the next two are more like sci-fi thrillers. So first we have The Reviver, and this is set in a world where you can actually revive newly dead people. And so they call it forensic revival, and it actually becomes just a regular part of a police investigation to revive the newly murdered victims, who can then tell them, who killed them and what happened, and it holds up in court and everything. But our detective, who has this ability, one day he revives a victim and he sees somebody else, like somebody else was revived or some other presence was there, and it kind of puts a kink in what he thought he knew when it came to reviving people. And so he's trying to decide what's going on and what's happening. And then we have I Have No Secrets, and this is about a woman who witnesses a murder, but because she's unable to speak or move, the murderer doesn't find her presence alarming because she can't tell anybody. And so he tells her exactly what happened and who he killed and all of these things, thinking that his secret is safe because she can't tell anybody. But because I've considered this more a sci-fi thriller, it deals with technology that doesn't actually exist. And so technology catches up to the point where she is able to now move and talk, and so now she can start revealing all of these secrets that she knew about this murderer. But she's a little bit afraid that it's going to come back to haunt her and that this man is going to track her down for it. Okay, and then I have a survival book, and this is called Small Game. So this is about a reality TV show where you have these contestants that go out into the wilderness to try and survive. And our main character's job is actually to help rich clients that don't know how to survive in the wilderness, and she gives them tips and teaches them how to live out on their own in case something were to happen and they found themselves stranded. So she gets a call that invites her to be on this reality TV show, along with, the typical male grizzly guy, that's the outdoorsman. And then you have the Boy Scout, and then you have this other girl who's really doesn't know that much about surviving, but she just wants to be famous and wanted to be on the show. But things don't go down as planned on this show, and so they become stranded and they're by themselves and they're trying to survive. And then we have Imprints by Rachel Nunez, and this is about a woman who has the unique ability that when she touches objects, she kind of has a psychic ability that she can read emotions and read different things that pertain to this object. And the police contact her to see if she would touch objects that have to do with like missing people or murder victims to see if she can help with the case. This first one has like cultish vibes, so if you're into that kind of thing. And she's very fun and quirky. I really love the main character in this book. And then we have Murder by the Book, and this is about a woman who runs a small little library out of a trailer. Like those one kind of trailers that schools use when they need an extra classroom. You know, it's like that type of trailer. So she runs like a little library out of there. And the last person to come into the library to get a library card ends up committing suicide. But the police are kind of wondering, is it really suicide or was it murder? And so because she's technically the last person to see him alive, she gets swept into this investigation. This one does has a little bit of a love story. I know not everybody likes that, so just be aware going in that there is a little bit of romance. I thought it was cute, but I know not everybody likes that. And then we have The Black House, and this also has to do with psychic abilities because we have this girl who, when she was 5 years old, she either had a dream or had a vision about this man on this faraway Scottish island that she's never been to. She sees his murder or his death, and the media goes crazy because her little vision ends up coming true. And so then 20 years later, when she's an adult, she starts getting these threatening notes, and so she wants to investigate and see what actually happened all those years ago on that island. And then we have Games for Dead Girls, and this says exploring the fine line between where the supernatural ends and real human monstrosity begins. A ritualistic game turns deadly for two young girls, but it will be years before they must face the true horrors of their past. So this is about a girl and her sister who go to this island as part of a holiday, and one of them's just there for the sun and the water and to have a holiday, and then our main character is there to write a book, and so she's doing research, which I love books about writers. And while she's researching for her book, she discovers that all of these girls have gone missing on this island. And recently, one girl was just snatched on the beach, just in broad daylight. So she kind of starts wanting to know what happened to these missing girls. In the last video, I said I wasn't going to do authors because I already had a video on Have You Heard of These Authors? I was going to be focusing on individual books, but I'm going to break that one time and talk about Carol Goodman. So I have 3 of her books, and I just don't hear anybody talk about Carol Goodman. I think she's been around for a long time, and that's probably why, you know, when you have authors that have been writing for decades, they just kind of get shuffled off to the side. They're not new or exciting or whatever, but I'm going to talk about her. I haven't read anything by her yet, but I picked up these 3 because they all sounded really good. So first we have The Widow's House, and I at first picked this up because I thought it was a haunted house story, but it's classified as a thriller, so I don't think it is. But anyways, this is about a woman and her husband who want to get away from it all and find some breathing room because they're both writers, and so they want to have time and space to write, and they also want to work on their marriage, which has had some bumpy roads, and you know, they just want to start fresh and have a reset. And so their old college writing professor, he hires them to be the caretaker for his home while he's away. And so they think that this would be perfect. But soon after they move in, our main character starts hearing babies crying, and she starts seeing figures out in the fog. And so she thinks that, you know, something nefarious is going on. Then we have this one that sounds a little gothic as well. So we have this woman who wrote this book called, okay, I apologize, my camera was falling, so I had to fix it. But anyways, we were talking about this one, and this is about a woman who goes to write for this older woman who wrote this famous book called The Secrets to Wycliffe Heights, and her readers are anxiously awaiting the sequel. But unfortunately, the writer was in a fire, and so she's got scars, and it left her blind. And so she really can't write anymore. And so she hires our main character to come dictate for her while she tells her the story. And so she writes it down for her. And so while she's there and she's, writing down this woman's research and notes and story, she starts to realize that perhaps the story that she's writing is not actually fiction, because the estate that she's staying in with this older woman was actually a psychiatric hospital for wayward girls, and that's apparently what the novel's about. But she starts to do research on the house that they're staying in, and she's like, I don't think these novels are fictional. And so she kind of wants to unravel the secrets to this place. And then we have The Night Visitors. And this one sounds like it's going to have an unhinged social worker in it. So we have a woman and her son who are fleeing an abusive relationship. And this social worker gets called. And instead of taking them to the shelter like she normally would, she actually takes them to her own private house out in the woods, which ethically speaking, you're really not supposed to do. But she does it anyways. And they get snowed in, and then the woman who's fleeing her abusive husband finds out that the social worker had a brother who disappeared 35 years ago, and apparently her son looks just like him. So now she's starting to think that she's not really here to be helped, but rather the social worker has become obsessed with her son. So like I said, I haven't read from her yet, but I'm really anxious to. They all sound amazing. I have 3 of these. Maybe I'll do a vlog. That would be fun. Yeah, that would be fun. I think I might do a vlog, doing like a author taste test of these books. If you guys would be interested in that, let me know in the comments. And then I have a couple of like home invasion type books. So we have You Let Me In. So this is about a woman who rents out her house, and then she decides she wants to move back in. So she evicts them, like not in a malicious way, but she tells them, I want to come back and live in my house again. So she kicks them out. But ever since she moves back in, she feels somebody's presence, and she feels like she's being watched. So now she's kind of worried that the tenants never actually left. And then we have You Never Know. And this is about a woman this is about a deaf woman, which I thought was really interesting because you just don't see that represented very often. And so it kind of reminded me of the movie Hush, if you've seen that. It used to be on Netflix. I don't think it is anymore. I believe it's a Mike Flanagan movie, but anyways, doesn't matter. That's what it reminded me of. So that's mainly why I picked this up. Because we have this deaf woman who fell in love with this man and got swept away in love, but then after she married him, she kind of discovered he's not the man that he said he was, and so they had their issues and they got divorced. But now somebody is breaking into her house, but because she's deaf, she can't hear them until she discovers later that somebody's been in her house, and so she doesn't know if it's her estranged husband. She doesn't know if it's somebody that's trying to steal from her. She just doesn't know. So I don't know. I love a good home invasion story, but a lot of times though, the home invasion part ends up being just a tiny part of the story. So I'm hoping that that's not the case here, but we'll find out. I haven't read this one yet. Okay, then we have The Woman in the Garden. And I saw this one on a lot of people's most anticipated list, but then like crickets afterwards. Like nobody actually read it and reviewed it. And so they said that it looked interesting and they wanted to read it, but then I never saw any book reviews for this. So this is about a woman who has a poisonous garden, which I love. I just think that's so fun when people have these gardens, but they're like dangerous plants, So this kind of has the vibes of like a Rear Window retelling, because you have this woman who has a telescope and she's kind of a recluse. She doesn't really like to go out. She's not social. She's very much an introvert, but she does like to spy on the neighbors, and she calls it her research, and she keeps notes of all of her neighbors' goings-ons. And so she has a new neighbor named Simone who moves in, and she becomes a little bit obsessed with her. And so she watches her all the time, and she's constantly having men in and out of her house. And so she's trying to figure out who these men are. And then one day she comes home on one of her rare trips, probably to the grocery store or something. And she discovers that somebody has uprooted her garden. And then she finds out that Simone has been murdered with a poisonous plant. So now she's trying to figure out if she can decide from these 4 men that have been going to her house often, which one of them has murdered her. So I myself have not read this one either, but it sounds really, really good, and I hope to get to it soon. And then we have The Night the Lights Went Out by Karen White, and this is more like rich people drama. You have this woman who didn't grow up rich, but she becomes rich later on and gets swept into this rich people drama in this new neighborhood full of rich white people, and she's actually divorced, and so when she moves to this neighborhood, people start blogging about her and gossiping about her and her divorce. But she becomes friends with a woman that kind of helps her navigate through it. And they become fast friends, but then they start kind of gossiping about the other ladies in the neighborhood, and maybe things in this neighborhood aren't as picture perfect as they think they are. I guess this one might be considered more of a police procedural as well, not a thriller. So sorry, but it's You Know Her. So this is about a police detective who happens to be a woman, and all of her other colleagues are male, and they are convinced that she's just a diversity hire, and they don't want to train her, they don't want to be around her, they don't think she knows what she's doing. And so she becomes friends with this bartender, and they kind of share their own woes about the misogyny and stuff. But as their friendship grows, she starts to believe that the serial killer that they're trying to track down is actually this woman that she just befriended. But she doesn't think anybody is going to believe her, not only because they don't like her, but they also don't think that a woman could be a serial killer. And so she is trying to do her best to do it on her own and show them that she can be the detective that she knows she can be. And then we have Privacy, and this is about a therapist who receives a terrifying phone call from one of her patients whose husband has kidnapped her. And so she's able to rush over to this woman's house and talk the husband down, and saves this woman from her abusive husband. And so the media gets hold of this, and it just blows up, and everybody is talking about this. But somebody doesn't like her and doesn't think that she's a good therapist or something. And so they start terrorizing all of her patients. And so all of her patients start receiving threats and start receiving like little gifts that would mess with their mental state in order to get to the therapist. And so as a therapist, she's freaking out because people are messing with her clients and with her patients in order to get to her. So she wants to try and find out who it is that's doing it and stop them before they could do too much damage to these delicate psyches that she's trying to help. And then we have Number One Fan. And I haven't read this one yet, but I really want to. It sounds so good. So this sounds like a retelling of Misery by Stephen King, except it's like a gender swap. And so you have this woman novelist who is on her way to a book event, and the driver of her taxi ends up kidnapping her. And he's, her number one fan, and he knows all about her books. And so it sounds so much fun, and I can't wait to read it. And then we have a couple of books about nannies. The first one is The Truth Hurts. And this is really only about a nanny in the beginning, though. But regardless, so this woman, she is hired to be a nanny. She doesn't necessarily want to, but she's running away from her past. And basically she gets to be a nanny in Ibiza. And so she gets this free holiday in this exotic location. And so she's like, sure, yeah, I'll go with these rich people and, do the whole holiday thing. But while she's there, she gets fired. And so now she has no money to get back home, and she has no job, and she's stranded. And so she ends up meeting this man, and they fall in love, and they end up getting married. And so it's kind of like neither one of them really trusts the other one. And so he knows that she has secrets that she's omitting, but she also begins to realize that he might not be the man that she thought he was. And then the last book I have to talk about is The Nanny by Gillian Macmillan. And this is about a girl who, when she was 7 years old, her nanny went missing. And she was convinced that her mother murdered her because she never liked the nanny and she was jealous. And she loved that nanny. That nanny raised her, and she was very upset when she went missing. And so she kind of had a bad relationship with her mother. But then years and years later, when she's an adult, they discover a skull on the property in the lake behind their house. And she starts trying to piece together what happened to the nanny, but in so doing, she starts to wonder, was it really the nanny that was the one that loved me? Or was she a bad person and my mom took care of it? And so she's trying to decide if her mom maliciously murdered the nanny, or if the nanny was killed for good reasons. So that's all the books I have to talk to you about. I realize that everybody, watches different booktubers or follows different people on Instagram. So you might have already come into contact with a lot of these books and I just missed it. That's the hard part about coming up with books that people haven't seen, is that's kind of relative because everybody sees and views different content. But I tried to find books that I don't see a lot of buzz for, I don't see a lot of reviews for them, so that if perhaps you haven't heard of these books, then, now they're on your radar. So anyways, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up to let me know. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I post a video every Friday, and I hope to see you in the next one. See ya.